Green peas were left to swell overnight in a jar for preserves. I was instead looking to preserve soil, my garden's actual treasure. Unbeknownst to me, I started this journey, a paradigm shift of understanding more what actually sustains our food. Suddenly, planting a fall crop of peas took on epic relevance. It was past the time for planting fall crops. The summer heat had subsided, and many once exuberant plants neared the end of their life cycles. There weren't enough weeks left of mild weather to produce a crop of peas. Yet, I still got my jar of soaked peas ready to plant them. I wanted to try nonetheless. Getting the timing right for fall crops is always a bit tricky. It takes planning and experience to know how late you can plant and still get a harvest before winter's unpredictable first frost comes in as a harbinger of bad news. I usually get it wrong because the right time to sow is at the height of August dog days, when a general malaise grips even the most enthusiastic of gardeners. The other problem is finding planting spaces during the height of summer. Inevitably, you have to be ruthless, yanking out less than productive plants that theoretically could still produce and live and set seed. Fortunately, I had a patch of cucumbers that had produced abundantly, completely dead, waiting to be cleared. It had created a dense mat of foliage, a tangle of vines over my groundhog deterring cages. A groundhog had cracked the code earlier in the year on how to get into the cage to feast on organic produce by doing what it does best, burrowing. A few rocks strategically placed around the edge of the cages had been able to solve that problem for now. While I wish I could have a completely groundhog-proof garden where I could freely plant without the encumbrance of marauding herbivores not having to use these cages, putting up more expensive and effective barriers around the garden just were not an option for me at this time, and these cages have made gardening possible at a low cost for many seasons already. The cucumbers had taken the space of 2 cages, although one of the cages was half covered by achocha vines, which were growing each day stronger. I would have to take a more surgical approach on this side, lifting away the upper crust of achocha vines to clear the dying plant matter underneath. I just don't like to kill plants that are in their prime. All throughout the growing season, I had mulched these 2 spaces with grass clippings, and it was incredible to see just how they disappeared, being digested by the soil as biomass of cucumber and amaranth was created overhead. Nature's alchemy of transforming refuse into food is brilliant, if not magical. That is the key to abundance, being thrifty with all resources. With space cleared, I went to grab my jar of soaked peas to cast upon the earth. Soaking peas will help them germinate better and faster. Because they are such a large seed, they need a lot of water to kick off sprouting, and if your soil is on the dry side, it can take several days or weeks to get things going. When they are pre-soaked for at least 8 to 10 hours, they immediately begin the process without having to wait for a good rainy day. This is especially important if you are growing a fall crop where you want to accelerate the process before winter arrives. I was using regular dry green peas you can find in stores because they are a cheap way of planting a patch of peas, especially if you don't plan on getting a crop. A few cents worth of seed will suffice, in my case, compared to several dollars worth if I were using peas from seed packets. You may be wondering why I was planting peas without the intent of getting a crop. While I could harvest the tender young pea shoots to eat in salads, that is something I did not plan to do. I had a different motive in mind. Coming up in the next block, I will explain what I wanted to get out of this. Planting peas, not expecting to harvest peas. I will show you how the plants progressed and the astonishing thing I learned in the process. You will not want to miss this right after this commercial. Suburban Homestead is brought to you by viewers like you. Thank you. I would like to especially thank those who have been watching the advertisements during these videos. If you would like to support more quality content in the channel, you can choose to become a patron through the channel's Patreon or buy art from my Etsy shop. This week, I'm featuring funky garden-themed magnets that will bring a bit of humor into your home or office. Hurry, limited offer. While I went about dispersing peas into the soil, I noticed that this soil, which had once been more like the typical red clay of Maryland, was darker in color and more granular. I later discovered that this is exactly what you want your soil to look like. It needs to be aggregated. Soil aggregates are formed by particles of clay, organic matter, bacterial gums, and fungal hyphae. They create structure within the soil that makes it possible for life to inhabit it. When I first started gardening years ago, I took on the usual directive of leaving soil cleaned by incessant weeding and by clearing soil before sowing and after the harvest. Taking that advice was disastrous. Plants would not grow as well without the input of chemical fertilizers, and the soil will form a crust that was impermeable to rain. It would also become more compacted as seasons passed. Fluffing the soil by tilling seemed imperative. This is terrible advice, especially for clay soils. I quickly learned that the soil had to be covered most of the time, and that tilling was not helpful, especially after the first initial clearing. So I got into the habit of covering the soil with plant refuse as soon as I sowed. Carting away dead plants may seem like the healthy thing to do to keep the soil clean, but it actually weakens the soil. But while all the things I was doing were helpful, I was missing one part of the puzzle to create a virtuous cycle, to actually create soil rather than deplete it, to see it as a factory of fertility rather than a mine. What I needed was plants. Living plants were needed all the time to create soil. You may think, wait, doesn't soil create plants? Don't I need to use soil to output plants? It's a chicken and egg situation. Frankly, you need both, but you actually need more plants. Most people call soil dirt. I don't like to refer to it as such. Dirt is the mineral aspect of soil. It is the clay or the sand, etc. But soil is living. It needs living organisms. And to keep those organisms happy and thriving, you need live plants. I learned this by looking into what has been called the soil food web. This term was coined by Dr. Elaine Ingham, an American microbiologist and soil scientist who has broken paradigms by suggesting that it is the biology in the soil that matters the most, not the chemistry. If you can get the biology right, you will have abundant plant growth. The main idea is that living plants form symbiotic relations with bacteria and fungi, giving them sugary exudates in return of certain nutrients fixed by these life forms. Other soil life also complete the cycle by eating these bacteria and fungi, kickstarting a virtuous cycle of life and death that ultimately creates soil. It may seem complicated, because it is. And frankly, I feel like some of Dr. Ingham's advice becomes confusing, because they are complex. But this is what I take from it, with a rather simplistic amateur perspective. Just keep plants going. This is what nature naturally does. This is why gardens have weeds that keep growing. This is how natural succession works. This is how majestic forests are grown. In the annual vegetable garden, we may not be able to put this into strict practice all the time. There are fundamental differences between the two, but learning to observe and try different things may be beneficial. The takeaway message is this: always cover your soil with plant matter and have things growing in it most of the time if you can. Let's not overcomplicate gardening, because frankly, it kinda grows itself.